the Justice Department said the burden of proof simply could not be met to prosecute Goldman based on claims that were made in an extensive Senate panel report that was from 2011. And in the report, for example, Senator Carl Levin, the chairman of the Senate subcommittee, said Goldman executives lied to Congress about the firm's bets against the housing market. The accusation triggered a Justice Department probe of possible perjury. The report also concluded that even as securities firms flooded the market with securitized mortgages and advised clients to buy them, firms privately used words like crap and flying pig to describe the financial instruments. Now, this whole episode was enough to give birth to dramatic scenes like this in Senate hearings.
You have an adverse interest to your client when you're selling something to them. Do you have the responsibility to tell that client of your adverse interest? That's my question.
Sure, Mr. Chairman, I'm just trying to understand.
No, I think you understand it. I don't think you want to answer.
There were many scenes like that. That was over the Abacus deal, where Goldman didn't tell investors that the hedge fund Paulson & Co. had helped choose the securities in the deal and, oh yeah, was betting against it. Speaks volumes for those securities. And Timberwolf, that CDO, remember that, where they hawked debt, including mortgage securities, reportedly that they expected to perform poorly. That gave birth to scenes like this.
You didn't tell them you thought it was a deal?
Well, I didn't say that.
No. Who did? Your people, internally. You knew it was a deal, and that's what your email shows.
We had to bleep that, but I think you probably remember that episode quite well. This was all enough for lawsuits and civil settlements with regulators, mind you. There was the $500 million+ one that the SEC settled with Goldman over the Abacus deal with. This wasn't enough to prosecute anyone, though. So what's wrong here? Is it the law? Is it the lawyers? Is it my frame of mind? Am I just seriously misguided? Well, let's ask Gerald Celente, founder of Trends Research Institute and publisher of the Trends Journal, because he has his pulse on all of this. First, Gerald Celente, thank you so much for being on the show. It's always wonderful to have you on.
And always my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course, especially on a Friday. It's a nice way to round out the week, although I wish I had better news to report than this story that there will be no charges for financial fraud related to the mortgage crisis for Goldman Sachs. So, Gerald Celente, really? The Justice Department couldn't find anything?
They never find anything. You didn't see any charges come up against John Corzine with the MF Global scandal. He can't find, $1.6 billion. You mentioned about Goldman Sachs being fined over $500 million. What was it, 2 weeks ago? HSBC being fined for money laundering. And it's more than just the financial institutions. Just this week, Blackwater, that wonderful mercenary firm that keeps changing its name.
Yeah.
They just got fined for selling arms, and they were fined again a few years earlier. You look at what's gone on in just this year, over $8 billion in fines collected from drug companies, from military contractors and mercenary contractors, from the financial institutions. You don't see one head roll. This is to call it a justice system is criminal. It's not a criminal justice system. You have a bunch of flunkies, a bunch of suck-ups, and a bunch of bureaucratic lightweights that keep swinging through revolving doors from government to the so-called investigation agencies and enforcement agencies that bow down to their old bosses and suck up to power. When are people going to see the truth? How many times do you need to read all about it? It's there every day. Look what happened in the LIBOR scandal. What, $700 trillion worth of dough being regulated, rigged game? And what does Robert Diamond do, the former CEO of Barclays? Oh, I'm sorry. And he leaves with over $100 million. The game is rigged from top to bottom. You're right. The word justice, as we say, is being misspelled. It's J-U-S-T-U-S. Don't get caught stealing a sandwich out of a 7-Eleven,
right.
boy, will they pounce on you.
Right. I know. And just to show that contrast, Gerald, there was a story that a former employee of Goldman Sachs now faces state authorities in New York after he already faced federal charges, was convicted. That case was appealed. Now the state authorities are after him for stealing software from Goldman Sachs. It's like, don't you dare do anything criminal against Goldman Sachs. But if you are Goldman Sachs or an executive, you can steal from investors and you'll be just fine. Is that does that illustrate this issue we're talking about?
Yeah, the cops go after the low-hanging fruit. Let's call it what it is. Go occupy Wall Street. You see how tough they get. You know, be a small guy on the chain or a small woman in the scam. Boy, do they whack you down. But not if your name's John Corzine. Oh, and by the way, the law firm that MF Global used is attached to the Attorney General and Assistant Attorney General's law firm. I mean, what are you, 6 years old? You can't see through this stuff? Look at one after another. The game is rigged. Look what happened about a week ago. A jury found this guy that the feds were trying to prosecute from Citigroup, and they let him go because they asked, I wanted to know, this is from the foreman of the jury, I wanted to know why the bank's CEO wasn't brought up on trial. I'll tell you why. It's very simple. They're better than us. That's right. They're better than we are. They make hundreds of millions of dollars doing dirty deals. We have to work for a living. We're the suckers. We pay for their criminality. And that's what's happened in America. And by the way, look what China is doing to that person. You know, they're ready to execute her.
Yeah.
And look at the Iranians that everybody hates. They just found 4 bankers guilty, and they're talking about executing them. That's what I'd like to see. I'd like to see some high-level executions going on. Let the heads roll on Wall Street, and maybe, as they love to say, that will send a message to the rest of them.
Well, that's certainly, I'm not going to disagree with you there. That would send a message. I guess short of that, what do you think would change this situation? Because as we both talked about, there are plenty of civil settlements. So there are plenty of these civil cases where these huge corporations and these Wall Street firms do settle for millions of dollars over these charges. But what do you think it would take to get criminal prosecutions? Would it require changing the law? Because I keep seeing this issue of the burden of proof is just too high when it comes to fraud criminally in the way that the law is written, the letter of the law. Is that the problem? Or is it, no, it's not. It's the lawyers or the people that are pursuing these cases.
It's the white-collar crime business. They have the best mouthpieces in the world, and they're all tied together. Isn't it a coincidence, by the way, that John Corzine, you know, the guy, as I said, can't find $1.6 million out of robbing it from segregated funds like my own. Isn't it funny that the guy who's the head of the Commodities Future Trading Commission, Gary Gensler, was also a guy from the Goldman Sachs gang and under the tutelage of Corzine when he was the CEO of the Goldman Sachs gang? It's one big club and we're not in it. Let's call it what it is. It's the merger of state and corporate powers called fascism. And under a fascist regime, the little people get slapped down at will, and all the guys at the top of the chain, the mafia, the banking mafia, and the political dons, they all get a free ride. How much more proof do you need? Again, go outside the banking industry. Look at GlaxoSmithKline. Look at Merck. Look at Johnson & Johnson. Have you seen one head roll? Oh, yeah, the government collects money so they could pay their guys and keep getting more money to keep their game going, and none of the big heads roll. Oh, and by the way, if you get caught stealing that chicken sandwich 3 times, then it's 3 strikes, you're out, and now you're doing hard time with some guy that got caught selling, an ounce of weed. So let's put this into perspective.
No, I know. I do think that's important. That said, I don't think you can see this, Gerald, but I can. We have the front page of your Trends Journal behind me where we have Jesus chasing the bankers out of the temple. I'm assuming this is a reference to when Jesus chased the money changers out of the temple, which was in the Bible, from what I understand. I guess the question here, is this more of a moral issue now? The law has failed to go after these untouchable guys, and this is really about morality in this country and, I don't know, instilling some of it?
Yeah, again, this is as old. That's why we put that picture up there. It's as old as history. It's the greedy stealing from the rest of the people. It's usury. That's all it is. I mean, look at the deal now. You put your money in the banks and you don't get anything in return. And they're borrowing money for nothing virtually, and they're loaning it out at the highest interest rates they can, particularly if you have a credit card. So nothing has changed. Yes, it's about morality. That's all it's about. Pick up the paper this last week in New York. Oh, these 5 guys that they accused of killing a cab driver or somebody. Oh, they're innocent now. How many people have been innocent that have been proven guilty by, quote, overzealous prosecutors? They could use the letter of the law when they want to. They just don't use it for their friends. And yes, it's an issue of morality. Again, not in a religious sense, only in a factual sense. I have an idea. Let's start a war over in Iraq. We'll say that the cat has weapons of mass destruction and ties to Al-Qaeda, even though he doesn't. We'll kill 1 million+ people, cost us $1 trillion, sacrifice the lives of our troops and their limbs and their lives and their families' lives, and we'll just keep it going, and we'll call it a victory and leave.
And Gerald Celente, it sounds like a nightmare if only that was the case. Unfortunately, you just laid out a lot of true statements there. We're going to keep discussing this, though. We're going to go to a break. We'll be back with more with Gerald Celente, founder of Trends Research Institute, publisher of the Trends Journal.